Hello, my name is Julia Meinetsberger. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Jaén, and I'm very happy to participate in the CONCLIMA conference today. Today I would like to talk about biopesticides for climate-resilient agriculture, sustainable practices, and regulatory advances using Xylella fastidiosa as a case study. Climate change, pesticides, and sustainable agriculture are inherently connected. In this sense, climate change is profoundly impacting agriculture around the world, posing significant challenges to food security and the livelihood of farmers. The effects are complex and vary by region, but generally they include direct impacts on crop and livestock productions. These direct impacts can be changes in temperature, which will cause reduced yield, heat stress, shifting growing seasons and suitable areas, or phenological mismatches. Direct impacts also include changes in precipitation patterns, which may cause drought and flooding or extreme rainfall, as well as increased CO2 levels, changes in pests, weeds, and diseases, as well as cause soil degradation or the sea level rise. There are also other impacts, such as impacts on food security, and here it's important to note that climate change affects all four pillars of food security, namely availability, access, utilization, and stability. In this sense, climate change can cause reduced availability of food, a disrupted access, for example through disrupted supply chain, diminished utilization, or a decreased stability of the product. On the other hand, of course, there are several strategies to adapt to climate change in agriculture, and these can include, for example, diversification of crops, precision agriculture and technology, sustainable farming practices, better water management, the use of climate-resilient varieties, or adjusting planting or harvesting times. On the other hand, when we talk about food production, it's natural we talk about pesticides for the use in food production. Pesticides are widely used to protect crops from pests, aiming to increase yield and quality. But on the other hand, the use of pesticides can also have negative effect. These can include, but are not limited to, negative effects on human health, causing diseases such as cancer, severe effects on the biodiversity, so reducing biodiversity, for example, can impact negatively the water quality or have a negative impact on insects and wildlife in general. Pesticides and climate change also have a direct connection, and in this regard I would like to explain two aspects. First of all, how do pesticides contribute to climate change? So there's a direct and indirect action. And here we can, for example, think about that to produce pesticides, usually fossil fuels are used, as well as during transportation of these pesticides. And on the other hand, pesticides also contribute to climate change since soil normally acts as carbon sink. However, pesticides, as mentioned before, can alter the soil structure and therefore also alter the carbon sequestration potential of soils. On the other hand, it's also important to think about how does climate change impact pesticides use. In this sense, climate warming causes species habitat shift and increases survival rate during the winter of pests, and therefore this will cause a higher pesticide use. On the other hand, warmer waters increase pesticide toxicity due to their structure. Increased and heavier rainfalls can increase the leaching risk of pesticides into the soil and water. And then the drought might inhibit pesticide degradation because often the presence of water is necessary to degrade pesticides in the soil or in the water. Of course, there's a lot of efforts ongoing to find alternatives to the use of the traditional pesticides, chemical pesticides, and one of these strategies is the development of biopesticides. Biopesticides are naturally derived pest control agents that are gaining importance in sustainable agriculture as an alternative to synthetic chemical pesticides. They are sourced from a variety of natural materials, including animals, plants, bacteria, fungi, or minerals, offering an environmentally friendly approach to pest management. As with any agent, biopesticides also have advantages and challenges or disadvantages. One of the advantages are reduced environmental impact, enhanced soil health, improved food safety, as well as a high target specificity They have good resistance management because usually biopesticides do not cause resistance to antimicrobial agents. They contribute to organic farming and they have economic benefits. But there's also some disadvantages or challenges connected to the use of biopesticides. They often have a high production cost. They have a limited shelf life and might have some specific storage requirements. They often have a slower action, and the high target specificity that we already mentioned as advantages could also be a disadvantage. So that's a double-edged sword. Why is it a disadvantage? Because if the agent is too specific in order to have a broad application, we might need a broader cocktail of biopesticides in order to address several issues in the plants. Also, farmer awareness and adoption barriers need to be overcome. And on the other hand, supply chain and market availability are still limited, and there exists a regulatory complexity in the use of biopesticides. And I will come back to that in a little while. Currently, there are different types of biopesticides available or under development. These can be grouped into 3 different pillars or groups, which are microbial pesticides. These are microorganisms such as bacteria, fungi, or viruses. Biochemical pesticides that are naturally occurring substances that control pests through non-toxic biological mechanisms. These can be, for example, plant extracts, pheromones, or insect growth regulators. And the third group would be a plant-incorporated protectant, PIPs, which are produced by genetically modified crops that have been engineered to express pest-killing proteins. Now I would like to highlight the necessity and the urgent need to develop these new biopesticides using the case study of Xylella fastidiosa. Xylella fastidiosa is a bacterium affecting over 600 plant hosts worldwide, including economically highly relevant plants such as, for example, olives, citric fruits, or almonds. Xylella fastidiosa was first detected in the EU in 2013 in Italy, with a predicted large-scale expansion across the European or Mediterranean territory. And if this expansion takes place, there is predicted a potential annual production loss of minimum 5.5 billion euros, and it could put nearly 300,000 jobs at risk. Xylella fastidiosa is also highly impacted by climate change. In this regard, climate change has the potential to change the distribution of pests globally and their resistance to pesticides. Xylella fastidiosa occurs over a wide range of climatic zones, and here it's important to note that the minimum winter temperatures are the main limitation of a potential spread. In this regard, air temperatures below -5 degrees cause reduced bacterial viability and thus limits the spread. Here, climate change may alter the distribution of suitable area for Xylella fastidiosa in Europe as minimum winter temperatures increase. There are current options to fight Xylella fastidiosa, which can be grouped into 3 different pillars. That would be the bacterial control, vector control, and plant resistance. Bacterial control focuses on the bacterium Xylella fastidiosa itself and mostly relies on chemical compounds such as pesticides or mineral-based compounds. For the vector control, the focus does not lie on the bacterium, but rather on the insects that act as a vector propagating the bacterium through the orchards. And here, of course, as a vector control, there's insecticides and repellents used. And then finally, in terms of plant resistance, here this relies on resistance genes or targeted breeding. But that said, it's important to note that currently there's no efficient field treatment available to protect crops against Xylella fastidiosa. In this regard, I would like to briefly highlight 2 research projects that we are performing at the University of Rhein, termed the Smart AgriSpore and the Target XF project. Smart AgriSpore project is funded under the Marie Curie Actions Individual Fellowship, whereas the Target XF project is a follow-up project funded under the European Regional Development Fund, both headed by me as principal investigator. Both projects focus on fighting the Xylella fastidiosa threat to EU agriculture, notably in olive orchards, by developing smart biopesticides based on bacterial spores. Here, specific aims are to provide new knowledge on the treatment against Xylella fastidiosa under field conditions, expand our repertoire of alternative biopesticides for use in agriculture in the European Union, specifically target the Xylella fastidiosa in infected trees as well as in vectors, and we use Bacillus species and Bacillus spores as biopesticide agents. In this regard, we have isolated a large amount of Bacillus species that are inherently present in olive orchards in the Andalusian regions. And we could show that several of these candidates show very good antimicrobial activity against Xylella fastidiosa, while also having a good stability under field conditions. As mentioned previously, there's also some legislative hurdles for the development of biopesticides, and I would like to briefly mention some of them. Here, for example, the most important initiatives would be the European Green Deal as well as the Farm to Fork strategy. These initiatives set very important goals for agriculture for 2030, which are to reduce the use and risk of chemical pesticides by 50%, also to reduce the risk posed by high-risk pesticides by another 50%, and it also aims to have at least 25% of the EU agricultural land under organic farming by 2030. So these are highly ambitious goals. Regarding the EU legislation and pesticides, there are 4 regulations applicable, amongst others, applicable since 2022 concerning the approval of microorganisms as active substances in plant protection products. And I will talk about each one of them briefly now. First of all, Regulation 2022-1438 concerning the authorization of plant protection products and their placing on the markets includes some modifications and additions that relate specifically to, first of all, the necessity that a microbial agent needs to be deposited in an internationally recognized culture collection and receive an access number. Also, the identification of the microorganism needs to be done at least at strain level, and information must be provided on whether the biological material is wild type, mutant, or genetically modified organisms. Regarding the safety aspects, the microorganism must not be toxic or pathogenic to humans and have no functional or transferable genes encoding resistance to relevant antimicrobial agents. And finally, also, it states the necessity that the agent must be susceptible to at least 2 classes of antimicrobial agents to be considered as low-risk agent. We then also have Regulation 2022-1439, which gives an amendment concerning antimicrobial resistance and the presence of antimicrobial resistance genes. And here information is required on whether the bacterium shows any resistance to the relevant antimicrobial agents or whether the antimicrobial genes are acquired, transferable, and functional. On the other hand, Regulation 2022-1440 indicates changes to data requirements for plant protection products containing microorganisms. And both amendments together aim to update the data requirements for the latest scientific developments and adapt them to specific biological properties of microorganisms. Finally, we have Regulation 2022-1441 on uniform principles for the evaluation and authorization of plant protection products containing microorganisms, and here data assessments are harmonized between member states, ensuring a high level of protection of human and animal health. Taken together, we can see that there is a lot of scientific development as well as legislative development to further the developments on biopesticides, especially based on microbial biopesticides for use in sustainable agriculture in response to climate change. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.